What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Yesterday, the embargo lifted for Dragon Age the Veilguard. Reviews started flooding in, and it was all over the place. I mean, seriously, this is clearly one of the more controversial releases of 2024, and it was like that since they originally debuted the game itself, but this was something else. We're going to go over all of that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Nintendo with their recent firmware 19 actually causing some issues for the Switch, and it looks like now they've actually managed to get a hotfix out for some of those problems. And then we also have a game that is now 2 decades old, and it's one of those situations that it will also make you feel old, especially if you've been around for a bit playing games. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps it a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're gonna start today with Bungie and their next big release coming up. That's Marathon, as there's still a lot of mystery around this game. Well, we do know it's an extraction shooter, but when are we going to actually see the gameplay? When are we going to hear about maybe a release schedule they have lined up? Well, they did release this video, and this is just titled Marathon Developer Update, where, well, a developer sits here and kind of explains some of the stuff for it, and it's about 9.5 minutes, which after I went through it and I put down some notes, I realized that like 2 lines. So basically, as they're going through this update, they mostly just explain what an extraction shooter is, the fact that they're going to be tackling that with different classes of characters, and they have 2 screenshots, which are actually just like concept art pieces. One is for Thief, and the other one is for Stealth. Now, these just appear to be code names they have for the characters. I assume they're going to have just more personality added to them, and they'll have, full-on character bios and stuff. But other than that, they talked about how they're currently doing like testing now, but it's not as like opened up, and it seems like next year in 2025, they'll start doing a bigger closed beta where they'll just get many more people from the community involved, and that's kind of it. So Marathon is still something I have a lot of questions about, because clearly Bungie is banking a ton on it, and with what's been going on there, they definitely need a win after Destiny 2, so we'll see. But unfortunately, not a ton of information to pull from this release that we hope is hitting sometime late 2025. We'll see. Also, we do have 2 new games going into the Nintendo 64 NSO Mature Rated app. This was shared over on Nintendo's official account, where they say Shadow Man and Turok 2 Seeds of Evil are playable as part of N64 NSO Mature 17+ collection of games, available to Nintendo Switch Online and expansion pack members. I checked the trailer and it was pretty cool. It was kind of set up as like a 90s horror kind of theme to it, very campy, but I don't have a ton of experience in Shadow Man, other than I remember the cover for it with the guy holding the skull very close to the camera. Turok, though, this case Turok 2 Seeds of Evil, I mean, the Turok line of games on the N64 were classic multiplayer experiences, right there next to something like GoldenEye or Perfect Dark or Mario Kart. If you're a lot of murder happening, you go to some of the other ones, but then if you just got to race around with the Mario characters, you go to good old Mario Kart. But I mean, these are some pretty fun games to drop in, and it is nice to see Nintendo utilizing that mature rated app. Just waiting for the day that the deals can line up with them, and now Microsoft and Conker's Bad Fur Day can go in. Well, we are seeing a lot of rare titles as it is with Banjo-Tooie recently. Why not go ahead and drop Conker into that mature rated app while it's there as well? Oh, and if you were someone who missed out on that 30th anniversary wave of controllers or the PlayStation 5 Slim system over on PlayStation Direct, it appears more stock will be made available later on today, as you can see over on their website. Current listing October 29th from 9 a.m. Pacific or noon Eastern time. So you should see some go in stock here. I don't know how fast they're going to go out of stock, but just giving you a heads up, you may want to be there on that page a few minutes before, just to make sure you're set up and get an earlier spot in line, especially I think for the controller, which is still really the only thing I picked up from this line, is just having a DualSense controller that mimics the look and the color scheme of the original PlayStation. Is that to me was an easy pickup, but just wanted to give you a heads up for it. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Dragon Age the Veilguard. As I mentioned, the embargo for reviews lifted yesterday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and I was very curious to see where this one would fall on the scale of Metacritic, which, let's just take a look. It's currently sitting at an 84. Now, this is on 51 critic reviews, and I will admit, when I saw that, I said, wow, okay, that's not as many reviews as I was expecting. There was talk that maybe BioWare and EA were being a bit stingy with some of the review codes, although it is that situation where, yes, they will at times try to look and see where review codes are going, and that just seems to be how it is nowadays anyway. I've noticed that more and more recently with some of these bigger publishers, but there were still reviews pretty much across like the entire spectrum, with some being a bit more negative, others being more positive, but it coming in at an 84 was a couple points lower, I think, than what I was expecting. I was looking at 86, 87 territory, but yeah, 84. I mean, it was a couple points on Metacritic, so it's kind of a wash there, I guess. Now, looking at the overall split, it's currently sitting at 39 positive, 8 mixed, 0 negative, and some outlets were very, very high on this game. Eurogamer, for example, said a fantasy role-playing game of astonishing spectacle. This is the best Dragon Age, and perhaps BioWare has ever been. I also noticed that IGN gave it a 9 and basically was like, yeah, if this is it for Dragon Age, they're going out on a high note, which seems very ominous for BioWare, who, according to IGN, just put out an incredible experience here. With Dragon Age the Veilguard. Going on the opposite end of the spectrum, as mentioned, there were some in here like VGC with a 60, saying Dragon Age the Veilguard feels like BioWare playing it too safe, while it nails what it does best, like the excellent cast and interpersonal relationships. From a gameplay perspective, it feels out of date. Shack News gave it a 70 and said this is formulaic BioWare set in a fantasy fiction story with the feels of a summer movie, and while we think it's a very well put together game, we ultimately couldn't find the oomph that could push it over into greatness. I also noticed that SkillUp had, I think, a very well done review that was like 40 some odd minutes long, and for the most part, he couldn't recommend the game, and there were many reasons for that, which I feel like SkillUp does a good job at least explaining why he doesn't like a game, or if he does like it, why he does. And some of the reasons that I noticed there with Veilguard were kind of head-scratching in this case for BioWare, especially when you look back on the entire franchise of Dragon Age. It's certainly way different from what I remember was something like Dragon Age Origins, which the more I talk to people about this, the more it seems like that's still many people's favorite Dragon Age, although Inquisition does come up as well. I mean, technically that's coming off of a high note since that also got Game of the Year when it came out all the way back now in, 2014, so like 10 years ago. But in this case, obviously a massive change for the most part for people who were expecting maybe something that wasn't as action-oriented. Not that it's like the first time for the franchise going in that direction, just seems more so than ever. But the thing that keeps throwing me off, the art style, the art direction, art style, the characters, they just look kind of strange for this sort of a game, which I usually think of Dragon Age as more dark fantasy. Does not seem to be the case here. Very lighthearted, very Pixar looking, except the environments also then clashed with some of the character models, where the environments, from what's been shown and all, like a lot of the gameplay footage out there from all the different outlets, it looks very good, but the characters just don't quite fit in with it. Anyway, a lot of the discussion around the combat doesn't seem like overwhelmingly great. It seems more just serviceable, and then the writing kind of in that same category. So in some respects, it's an underwhelming delivery from BioWare, but on the other hand, it's like, well, it didn't come out terrible, so it's sitting at an 84. It seems about right overall, but I'm thinking about checking this one out, and the thing I'm running into now, and this is funny, I kind of fell into the trap of starting Metaphor, and I basically play Metaphor actually on the PlayStation Portal before bed, and that's kind of worked out, but now you get to there's certain parts of Metaphor you get to, and then it really picks up, and you're like, okay, well now I gotta play this for a couple hours at a time. That's kind of where I'm getting to at this point, so it appears Dragon Age is about a 40 to 50 hour game, and it seems more action-oriented, so maybe I can trade off back and forth between that and Metaphor. But then, oh yeah, here comes Mario and Luigi Brothership. Here comes Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D, and it's just, the snowball continues to build and build and build, going down the hill of releases currently heading towards the end of the year. So that's kind of the issue I have now. But yeah, I think I will pick it up and play it some and probably talk about it on the podcast one of the weekends coming up. Next up, let's talk about Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete. Now, we had already talked about Nintendo announcing that despite Pocket Camp ending its service, they were going to basically turn it into a complete paid-for game, as opposed to being a service-based game on phones that would be free. I mean, you'd have to pay for this one, sure, but I don't think it's necessarily going to put everyone off, especially if you're an Animal Crossing fan and they are selling you a complete game. In fact, it's actually pretty cheap, at least from what I'm seeing here. We can see this though posted up. This is over on Gamatsu, saying that it will launch for iOS via App Store and Android via Google Play on December 3rd. It's going to be available at the introductory price of $9.99, so $10. That'll be until January 31st, and then it will double in price to $20. Here's the thing, paying $10, or we'll say $20 starting February of next year, gets to the entire game with no microtransactions, and because this game has now been around for, get this, 7 years, it has built up a ton of content with over 10,000 items, a bunch of different animals and neighbors to meet, different seasonal events, and if you have been playing this entire way, your save data will carry over. And this is kind of a way for Nintendo to once again test the cell phone market to see if you can do a la carte sales for games that don't have the typical tropes of microtransactions and subscription services tied to it. Although they already did that for 7 years and got a ton of money out of it. The only thing that's kind of strange to me about this, I just mentioned there are many, I'm sure, whales for this game. It seems strange they wouldn't just be like, you know what, you've spent like $1,000 some odd dollars in this game over a near decade-long service for it. You can just have it. It's odd that they're like, hold on, $10. Although, if you've already spent that much, you're probably like, yeah, whatever, here you go, cool, now it's complete and I can keep playing it, as opposed to what typically happens with these phone games. It just gets shut down and then like, that's it. Any of the money you spent on microtransactions and stuff is just all gone then. So this is technically a better way to go, and hopefully some of these other companies that have these service-based games on cell phones take notes and try to do something similar, but we'll see how this one goes, and maybe it can actually jump to the top of paid charts on Google and Apple and could actually send a message. We'll see. Next up, let's talk about the Switch and firmware 19.0.0 that came out and was just general system stability, but it appears to have done the complete opposite, introduced instability for users, which we can see this is actually a thread that was forming many responses over on Reddit. And it just says, for those wondering about issues with version 19.0.0, I managed to call support and speak with a supervisor. And for the most part, the supervisor, they said, was very helpful and said, hey, you can send it in if you want, but it appears that it's actually in something going on with the firmware and updates and things are coming down the line. Now, with this, many people started to post that they were having issues in sleep mode, for example, when it comes to downloading, overheating issues where their fans were just going crazy after this update, and at times even just shutting down. In fact, I actually had an issue with my Switch where it just stopped turning on for a couple of hours, and I got to a point where even when I plug it in, for example, nothing would show up on the screen. I actually took the back off, pulled the battery, just like unplugged it from the board, gave it like 30 seconds to a minute, plugged it back in, and then it turned on with half a charge. So I don't know if it was stuck in a boot loop and I just had nothing on screen and that's what was happening, but I definitely ran into an issue there. However, now we can see we do have firmware 19.0.1 that was issued, and some of the patch notes here include fixed an issue where the GameCube controller connection tap and Nintendo GameCube controller were not recognized when using the controller connection tap, which was something else that was reported with some of those issues. And fix an issue where communication processes such as software downloads were not performed properly during sleep. So yeah, there appeared to be some kind of issue with this firmware that was introduced, and as I mentioned, I saw that Reddit thread was just piling up with comments and probably people looking for answers, just trying to figure out if other people are having problems. It does appear so, and it seems like Nintendo is aware of this with some of these updates like 19.0.1, so I guess keep an eye out to see if they introduce some other patches based on feedback they're getting, and let me know actually in the comments if you were also running into some of these problems. Maybe we can pull some responses to see what people are running into, and maybe if 19.0.1's managed to fix it. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a classic title that's now 2 decades old, and I actually was reminded of this as I was scrolling through Twitter, which we can see this is posted up by Avi Vermey, who was a director at Rockstar North during Grand Theft Auto San Andreas development, and yes, it's now 20 years old. It came out at the end of October 2004. Yeah, 20 years ago. That is absolutely insane. Although that is right at the end of the PS2 generation, just about, because I know the PS2 generation stretched on, but we were talking about the Xbox 360, and that was coming up here pretty quick. A year later, that would release. So this was not like the twilight of the PS2, but this was around the time where the developers were really starting to figure out how to get a ton out of this system, and I mean, San Andreas is one of the best examples of a system punching well above its weight class. I mean, this game, even now you go back and you're like, how in the world did they get this to run on the PS2? Think about that. Now go all the way back to 2004 and what our reaction was when we picked this up at the store and went home and popped it in. It was mind-blowing stuff. And it's again, one of those things where you look back and you're like, wow, time really flies. I mean, it really has been 20 years since Grand Theft Auto San Andreas released, and now we're looking at Grand Theft Auto 6 finally coming out, we think, next year, 21 years after San Andreas, which I will admit, saying like, oh yeah, we got Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5 and then 6, and you'll get all of those in the next 21 years. I probably wouldn't have believed you, although I guess the stretch between 5 and 6 has been like an eternity, it feels like now, but just impressive stuff. Let me know some of your best memories of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas down below, and if you can't believe it's actually been 20 years since it came out on the PS2. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, the reviews are in, will you be picking up Dragon Age the Veilguard? 71% are just not interested right off the bat. Okay, 24% say maybe later when it's on sale, and then 6%, yes, getting it ASAP. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who looked at it and was like, oh, this game looks cool. And they see the reviews and they're like, all right, great. It's more action oriented. Sure, I'm in. But I will say, I do see a lot of people online who are like Dragon Age diehards who are like very unsure still of this game, despite many of these reviews coming out, at least saying that it is a good title. It's just, I don't know. It seems unfortunate for BioWare to be in that position because they still have to work on Mass Effect. I think Mass Effect will be a much different tone. Like, I don't think they're gonna go with that kind of art style for Mass Effect, it being more of a sci-fi style game and it being like severely entrenched in its art style and its lore and everything. Whereas Veilguard seems to be a place for people who are even new to Dragon Age can kind of step in. I don't know if the next Mass Effect will necessarily be that, but I mean, I guess technically BioWare's put out a game that's not Anthem. Like it's reviewing well enough, and we'll see how sales are, and then maybe they can continue at least some of this upward trajectory towards a Mass Effect franchise that badly needs it after Andromeda. We can only hope. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Nintendork, says, for people who are sick of the constant Switch 2 rumors, how many of you remember the months leading into the Switch reveal? It was much worse than this. You know, I was thinking about this. I realized it's been almost 9 years since the build up for the current Switch. Like, remember, Nintendo told us about the NX in March 2015. And then the following year, April 2016, they once again told us that the NX, hey, that's coming out actually March 2017, and the next Zelda game is going to come out on that system. It's not just going to be a Wii U game. So we already knew about a game on the Switch like well before it's released, the next Zelda game. So every time we saw Zelda from then on out, we're like, oh, here's an NX game, which eventually became the Switch. The hybrid stuff got out there early. There were discussions around VR and Resident Evil and all kinds of stuff. It was non-stop rumor mill constantly. So part of that was the build-up technically for the Switch or the NX was like 2 years or so, whereas we're still kind of waiting for Nintendo to make more of a move than, hey, we'll reveal it before the end of this fiscal year. Even no code name, really nothing. That had to come out of data mines and stuff. So yeah, a lot of pent-up anticipation for this next system, and technically Nintendo put a countdown on themselves, and time's ticking. So hey, we'll see if anything happens this week, and if not, well, we know it's got to happen before the end of March 2025, so we'll see. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card, or maybe you wanna check out the latest Spawncast episode where we talked about Yukari Playlead, Nintendo's online playtest, and Call of Duty Black Ops 6, as well as more stuff. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.